So you come home and you find a notice on your door that says you have 10 days to quit, meaning 10 days to get out of your apartment. You thought you had a lease. What do you do? I'll tell you in just a moment. Hi, my name's Tony DeWitt. My job here on YouTube is to answer questions about the law. This is not legal advice. It's just a discussion on the law. If you need legal advice, you need to see a lawyer in your jurisdiction. Generally speaking, there are two kinds of tenancy. The first of those is a tenancy that is quote-unquote suffered month to month. I've always found that phrase kind of funny in the law, that you would suffer a tenancy, but given my experiences in college, I can honestly say that you do sometimes suffer a tenancy. But tenancy can be either at will, meaning it's a month-to-month relationship, or it can be a lease that is subject to a term, meaning it could be only 1 month. It could be a week if you were doing a vacation rental. And of course, it could be 3 months, 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, a year, 2 years, whatever you and the landlord agree on. When you have a definite agreement as to the term of your lease, then the only reason you can be evicted is for violating that lease. And that then becomes a matter of understanding what's in your lease. Usually when someone is going to be evicted, it is either because there is someone who is willing to pay a higher rent that the landlord can get in there, and you no longer have a lease, or you don't have a lease for a term of years or a term of months, or you have simply stopped paying your rent and the landlord needs to get somebody in there who will pay rent. Tenancy at will means that you are at the will of the landlord in terms of how long you get to stay there. It's often called a tenancy that's suffered month to month. Now, what that means is that you have the month from the date that you have to pay rent. Now, most landlords start on the 1st, but if you happen to move in on the 15th, well then, a lot of times your rent becomes due on the 15th. A lot of times landlords will bump up the rent, meaning that they'll take half a month's rent and then the actual tenancy will start then on the 1st of the next month. That would be determined by what's in your lease agreement. So you need to look at what the lease agreement says. If it says you have a lease for 6 months, then that's what you have a lease for. And you're guaranteed that you can occupy that property for that period of time as long as you do two things. 1, pay the rent on time as requested. And 2, not violate the lease. If you do either of the other two things, if you don't pay your rent on time or you violate the lease, then the landlord can evict you, usually in most states. If you have a lease for a longer term, a year, then usually you can't be evicted spontaneously before then, unless, again, you've violated the lease in some way. You brought in a pet when you weren't authorized pets, or you did some other thing that the landlord specifically prohibited you from doing in writing in the lease. One thing that sometimes gets somebody into trouble with a lease, particularly if they're a landlord, is they fail to understand what month-to-month tenancy is. If the rent is due on the 1st and you want the tenant to move out on the 1st of the next month, then you have to give him his 30 days notice prior to the 1st of the month. Meaning, if his rent is supposed to be paid on March 1st, and you want him out by April 1st, you have to give him the notice by February 27th or 28th, sometime before the 1st of March, in order for it to be valid for him to be out of there on the 1st of April. Likewise, a tenant that gets less than 30 days notice, in most cases, is not going to be forced to move out until after they've had 30 days. And that's because the law presumes you need some time to find a place to rent if you are evicted from your property. Recently, a lot of people have had difficulty paying their rent because of the coronavirus pandemic. And for them, there have been a number of programs in the works to obtain an abatement of rent in some locations, and in other cases, to have a moratorium on evictions. Now, a moratorium on eviction doesn't mean that you get to stay there forever and not pay rent. Your rent is still going to become due. It's simply that the landlord can't take you to court and force you out until such time as the law says that he can. Now, once that moratorium stops, you have two choices. You either have to come up with all the rent, all the back rent that you owe in order to stay in that location, or you have to move out. And generally speaking, they have to give you proper notice, but usually means giving you a notice to quit. Give them either 3 days or 10 days, depending on what your state's law is. And then they will take you to court and the judge will order you to leave. And of course, if you don't leave, then the sheriff comes and physically removes you from the property. And the landlord will hire somebody to move all of your stuff out onto the front lawn, which makes it your problem to get somebody there to move it to your new location. So for obvious reasons, it's in your best interest to negotiate with your landlord if you can, and if you can't, to find some place to live pretty quickly. Now, this is not a summary of all of your rights that you have with regard to eviction. It's simply a summary of some of the rights that you have, and all of your rights are going to be dictated by state law. So it's a good idea to contact a lawyer if you believe you are being wrongfully evicted. And if you have other problems with your landlord, for example, they turn off the power, or they turn off the water, or they turn off the heat, or they do other things that make your apartment or your home unlivable, then you may have a cause of action against them for what's called constructive eviction, meaning eviction without legal process. So it's a good idea to contact a lawyer in your jurisdiction and ask for advice. And I would note that there are a lot of legal services agencies and legal plans that help in this regard. I used to provide help for a place called the Samaritan Center, and they provided legal help to people who were being evicted. And a lot of times we were able to secure either other lodging for those people, or we were able to work with the landlord to work things out. So again, just because it involves an attorney doesn't necessarily mean you have to pay a lot of money to get the help. There are a lot of free services out there for people who truly can't afford good legal representation. If you found this presentation helpful, I would appreciate it if you would smash that like button and perhaps hit the subscribe button and press the notification bell so that you could be notified every time I release a video about the law. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a terrific day.